Hey everybody, MS Farzan here, and in this video we're going to take a look at how to make a pretty simple, very basic 2D card game using the Defold game engine. If you haven't experienced anything with Defold, it's a really fun to use and easy to use game engine that is open source and cross-platform. In fact, you can go to defold.com to read more about what it does. It's run by the Defold Foundation, and I've worked with it just a little bit, and I find it to be pretty straightforward in terms of as far as 2D game engines go. I haven't worked with the 3D aspect at all, and it uses Lua scripting to make your game logic work. A few things that we're going to need to set up before that I've already set up here and that you'll need to do is to download the game engine from this page. And we're also going to go to the asset portal and just look for Defold-Input, which is an add-on that you can use, or a library dependency that you can use to enhance some of the features that come out of the box with Defold. Unlike other game engines that try to provide everything out of the box, like Unity or Godot or even something like Phaser, Defold tries to stay as bare bones as possible, to be as lightweight as possible in terms of the install, the build sizes, and everything. So it really leverages a lot of different dependencies that are available in the asset portal. So for example, if you want to do any dragging and dropping and you don't want to write your own scripts for how to do that, which of course we'll need for our little card game here, you'll have to grab that from the asset portal, and the way to do that is just to go here, or you can even go to the external project page and just copy it to the clipboard, and then you'll go into your editor, and I'll show you how to do all that part. All I've done here is created a new blank template, very bare bones, just there's only a readme and some other stuff in here. Before the creation of this video, I've gone into the file system and added an assets folder, which has the assets that we'll be using. They're just like little sprites that we'll be using for the purposes of this tutorial. You can find the GitHub page, the repository for this project, in the description for this video, as well as some other helpful links, and you can grab these images from there or use your own. Either way is fine. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our project, and we're going to go to this game.project file here, and we don't need to change anything in the general project settings. What we will need to do is go to the display section, and we're going to change this just for ease of use to 1080 by 1920. Sorry, 1920 by 1080. And we'll save that. Control S to save. And then let's look at the dependencies that we have, the libraries that we have for this game. The way we're going to do that is we're going to go to, we are going to go to the project section here, and we're going to hit the plus sign next to the dependencies and just paste in the URL to that dependency or any dependencies that you might have. And when we save it, we're going to go up to project and then hit fetch libraries, and that's going to grab our dependencies, and you'll see this little in folder. And the in folder is one of the libraries actually the Defold-Input is made by one of the developers on Defold, named Björn Ritzl, who I must thank profusely for working with me on the forums to figure out how to best modify this and use this library to make this little template, and also in helping to figure out what a drop zone could look like when we're dropping our cards. And I highly recommend, in fact, if you're going to be playing around with this, head over to the Defold-Input repository and just grab this whole repository, or just download the archive master zip and create a new project or open it in Defold itself, just this whole project, and play around with the different features that they have, including moving the cursor around, saving game state, working with buttons, as it will generally really help you in understanding the logic behind how some of these things work. Also, I'm presuming that you have a little bit of background in using Defold. Maybe you've just done the basic tutorials. You don't have to be a master at Lua or any of those things, but just doing a few of the intro tutorials, which are available right when you open the client of Defold, will be really helpful for the purposes of our tutorial. Okay, so we've imported that. And so the first thing that we're going to do is just take a look at this cursor script. This is the script that we're going to import, and so there's a lot of stuff in here, and Defold-Input, the library, obviates the need for you to do that yourself. We're just going to import this into our own script and make it run. And so we're going to go into the main folder here. Actually, before we do that, let's just make sure our input binding has been set up correctly. This is the place under the game input binding where you would bind any key trigger. So if you're using the keyboard for input or a joystick or whatever, you would set that up here. By default, the mouse trigger has the input button 1, which is like your left mouse click, and it syncs that with this action, which is a string called touch. So we're going to remember that when we employ this in our scripts. Okay, very good. So we don't need any of this stuff right now. So we're going to go into the main folder and look at the main collection. A collection is just what it sounds. It collects all of the different game objects and components that you have in a specific area of the game. A collection could be like a boss that has a bunch of doohickeys on it, or it could be a level. And we're just going to use this main collection to store some of the main components of our game, like our cursor, our drop zone, the user interface, and spawner for our cards. So before we get into that, let's create a couple of game objects to start. Game objects are going to be one of the main components that you use in the game. Right-clicking on the main folder and saying New Game Object. And I'm going to name this Player Card. You see that it's located under the main folder, and it's giving the location playercard.go. Okay, the game object has nothing attached to it. First thing I'm going to do is add a component, because this is going to be one of our cards. I'm going to add a sprite, and this sprite, I want to add an image to it. And I've already run into an issue where I can't just add an image by itself. I don't have anything here. Even though I have added an assets folder, Defold doesn't recognize that those assets are meant to be used as sprites. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on main here again, and I'm going to add a new atlas, which is a way to collect or collate a number of different sprites. And I'm going to call it Player Card Atlas. And if you wanted to create different folders, which I recommend you do, you could absolutely do that. Right-click this atlas, and I'm going to add images to it. And for this tutorial, we're using a few cards from one of my games, which is called Hacker Battles, like a cyberpunk hacking game. And so the cyan cards, or the blue cards, we're going to treat as the ones we need for the player cards. Okay, so I've added these two. I can zoom out to see what they look like in the atlas. Might have to zoom out a lot. Okay, so there's a card back and a card front. And so for the playercard.go, I'm going to go down to the image here section, and I'm going to choose the player card atlas as the source of the image, and the default animation, or the image that I want to use, is the cyan ping, which is the front of the card. Okay. So I don't really need to do anything else here with this. All in terms of the sprite, we're going to be using it in a different way a little bit later on. The one thing that I will say is that we'll run into an issue with the cards being deployed as a little bit blurry, and we'll have to deal with that a little bit later. But for now, we're in good shape. So what I will do here next is we're going to add a collision object as a component. Collision object is just something that detects when two objects in the game collide with one another. And this collision object is going to be kinematic, which means that it will respond to things that are happening in the game, but not necessarily to gravity. What the next thing we need to do here is add, where we have the collision object selected, we're looking here in the inspector, and we're going to add this to the default group cards, and the mask will be cursor. This means that when we develop our cursor, we have to create a game object for that. We want it to collide with cards so that it is, in essence, knows that it is over a card and that we can manipulate the card in some way. So this is part of the cards group, and the mask, or what it will collide with, is called the cursor. We'll see later with the cursor that you can have a group collide with multiple different masks. This collision object needs a shape, so we're going to add a box. And we're just going to, whoops, we don't want to move it. We're going to select the sizing tool here to make it just about as big as the card is. Just like that. And we'll save it. And now we could just put this in our main collection. I'm not going to go through all that because the tutorials will show you how to do all that stuff. What we will eventually need is a way for the card to be instanced in the scene at the appropriate point in time, like when we click a button or when our opponent does something, what have you. What we'll need is a factory to do that for us. In fact, you know what the heck, let's just do this for the sake of the tutorial. We'll add the player card. We'll go to the main collection, right click on the top of the outline here, add a game object file. We'll add playercard.go. And so this will be right here in the origin 000. And then what I'll do is I'll hit Control B to build the game, and we'll just see it on our screen. So it's right there. It's not in the right place. It's huge, but we've done the job. So let's just leave that there. So later we'll create a factory and we'll spawn it differently, but we'll leave that there so we can work with the cursor next. Okay. So let's go to our main folder here, and let's add a, in fact, let's go to the main collection first. I have some cheat sheets here on my other screen, and I'm thinking through what's the best way to introduce each of these different concepts. So let's create a cursor here in the main collection. This doesn't need to be a game object that we instance at runtime. It can be just something that lives in the collection. So we're going to right click the collection and add a game object here. This is the only one that needs, so the reason why we're doing this here is we just need one cursor. We don't need like 100 of them, but we might have 100 cards, which is why we create like a template for that card here in the assets area of the game engine. So I've created a new game object. I'm just going to call this cursor. And note that it creates a unique identifier or a URL here /cursor. And I'm with that, I need to add a collision object, just like we just said. And that collision object is going to be of type trigger. And it's going to be under the group cursor. And we want that to interact not only with cards, but eventually we're going to have a drop zone where we drop cards into. Okay. Now under the cursor, We also want to add a component file, and we want to add this cursor.script, which is in the in folder that we imported. And we'll also add another script that will live here in the main hierarchy, new script that's called cursor controller. And before we actually do any work in that, let's remember to add that to our cursor game object by adding component file cursor controller. Okay, so that has everything we need, well, eventually, to make the cursor work. A lot of this is just drawn directly from the examples in the Defold-Input repository. So again, I highly recommend checking those out. Cursor controller script. This is just a basic template script where it has initialization area that when the script or that when the game object that this script is attached to comes into being, it can do something. When it leaves the game, it could do something. And final update happens every, I don't know, like 1/10 of a second or something like that. Something that happens every frame. That if you need something to happen every frame, you can put that in there. And then there's some other things like when it receives a message or on input, when it's reloaded, so on and so forth. So I already have this script pretty much ready to go. And some of it I'm just going to copy and paste because it comes from it's a mishmash of the cursor controller script that is offered in the example. Not available here in your in folder. It's actually in the Defold-Input repository where there's an example of using the cursor controller. But I will walk you through the code and you're welcome to copy and paste or write through it or whatever. Okay, so I'm just basically deleting all this and pasting all this other code. So let's look at this, and this is available in the repository for this video as well. So I'm saying I'm creating a local variable, meaning it's only available within the context of this script, cursor, and I'm requiring or importing the in folder's cursor script. And I've created a local can drag card, and which is a Boolean, a variable, and I'm calling that false. So you can't drag any cards. And I'm saying their local cards in dropzone are equal to 0. We haven't dealt with the dropzone yet, so we'll come back to this. In the initialization code block, there's some code that Björn Ritzl and the developers have provided that I've edited to help us with our exact functionality. And this first part, essentially, I haven't come across the self-forward input, but message post dot acquire input focus essentially means I want this game object to notify the rest of the game engine that this very game object should acquire input focus. It should acquire the focus of the input of anyone who's playing the game. So right now the only input we have is the mouse, and I want this game object to acquire that input focus. And now I'm using the cursor script to listen to any activity that's happening. And if there is a drag start message, I want it to print to the console here the word drag. And then they've also added this functionality that if the group that the message comes from is of the cards group, which we've already designated, if you return true, that just means that it shouldn't be draggable. So I've just edited here. If can drag here is false up here, then that should also return true, which means don't allow me to drag the card. And a simpler example here is that if the message group is the drop zone, which we'll create later, then just prevent dragging of them. We'll just take a cursory look at the cursor.script and see if we find the drag. Yeah, so here's the message that messages that are triggered, and there's also a Lua script that helps to manage all of these different things for us, but we don't really have to dig into that. Anyway, so on input, we are going to be doing basically acting as a cursor, and we're going to be producing these different messages as the game progresses. So if the cursor is over something, then print to the console cursor over and let us know what the message ID was, the message group, and the X and Y coordinates of that whosoever provided the message. I've added here if the message dot group is of the dropzone group, then we're going to add self over dropzone is equal to true. We haven't worked with that just yet. If the message ID is cursor out, print the same information, and self over the drop zone is false. If the message ID is cursor pressed, then we're going to print pressed with all that information again. And then we're saying here if the message group is of the cards group, then we add a little bit of code so that we can grab the script that we're going to attach to the can drag card, that we're going to attach to each card, and make sure that determine if it's draggable. And then we have more code here about how to handle the drag, which we'll return to in just a moment. I realize I'm throwing a lot of things at you, but it will make sense as we go along. Okay. So now the remaining thing we need to do here is we need to create a script for our cards. So I'm going to add a new script. We're going to call it just card.script. And I'm not going to do anything with this, but you can. But what I'm going to, with all this other code, all I'm going to do is I'm going to add a property here, go.property, and the name is draggable. I'm going to call it false. Actually, let's start it with true. We'll change it in a minute. What go.property allows you to do is make public variable that's available in the inspector. If you wanted to, if you had a speed of something, or you're testing out different things and you just want to click around and change things on the fly, you could do it that way. So what this allows us to do is, in the cursor controller script, we want to determine whether or not the card is draggable. So if we have a couple of checks here. First, if can drag card is false, then we don't want the cursor to be able to drag a card by default. That's just like a safety check. Like, let's say at the beginning of the game, you have some instructions that are on the screen, or your players have to click a bunch of buttons or whatever. We don't want them to be able to drag cards around. So if where we will change that, what we are going to do here is we're going to, when a cursor is pressed onto on top of a card, we're going to grab that is draggable. Where is it? Variable here, and if it's true, then we're going to change can drag card, the variable within this script, to true. And when the cursor is released, we'll change it back to false. So that's the way we kind of manage the logic around that. Cool. So let's attach this card.script to this game object. Add component file, card.script. And let's see if that's enough to get this to work for us. I build the game, Control B. Oh, we didn't make a collision object shape for the cursor controller. The helpful little build error here at the bottom of the screen. So we'll go to our cursor, collision object. We're going to add a little box shape. And I think the default is just fine. Let me just check my cheat sheet here. No, I'm wrong. We need to have the default is to have a sphere. Add shape, sphere, and the diameter will be 2. Just a tiny little collision object. Okay, let's build the game. And let's make this a little bit smaller just for now, just so you can see that cursor is over and out, over and out, over and out, and I'm seeing the console demonstrating what the game object is, what group it's part of, and the other information about the X and Y value. When I click, I not only see that it's pressed, but I see true, which is the in response to the Boolean that we set up, and then now it's dragging. It looks, kind of funny because I changed the aspect ratio. Let's just look at this again. So we added this little part to this script where it says if the cursor is pressed, then this is the part the devs have given to us. Press print pressed with all that information, and this is a part that I've added here. If the message group is of cards, then grab the URL of the message ID, and then find the script, and then change the can drag card, which is a variable within this script, to the is draggable setting of or the is draggable property of the card script, which right now is true. And then print can drag card, which is now true. Okay, and then when cursor is released, just make it can drag card equals false. So that's just the way that we can allow and prevent our cards from being dragged around. Let's build it again and just see it in action. So we're just dragging our card around. Great. So let's go back to our card script, and we'll make this false to begin with, just to make sure we can't drag cards unless we're supposed to. Okay. So we need a few other things here to flesh this out a bit. And one of the things that we need is, a spawner, for example, and something that will spawn our cards for us. So we'll go back into the main collection, right-click up here, and we'll add a game object. And we'll call this game object the spawner. And then we'll add a component here, and we'll add a factory, which takes a prototype, and we're going to use the player card go factory. I'm going to call this player card factory because we'll likely need a couple of other factories. And while we're at it, why don't we just create a couple of other game objects that will be useful in probably most card games, maybe not all of them. So you'll probably want a opponent card game object. And for the purposes of this tutorial, we'll also add, where's my game object? A opponent card back game object. For the opponent card back, well, for both of them, what we'll do is create a new atlas, and we'll call this opponent card atlas. Like I said, you could put these in different folders, and that would probably be a good thing to do. To the atlas, we'll add images, and we'll add the magenta back and magenta ping cards. Just make sure they look good by zooming out. Okay, great. And then for the opponent card back, well, let's start with the opponent card. We're going to add a sprite, and we'll use the default image opponent card atlas and use the magenta ping. That's this card. And we'll also add a collision object. Make sure it's kinematic. It's going to be of the group cards, and it's going to collide with cursor. Now you could add this to an opponent cards group or something else. We're actually not going to use this at all in this tutorial, just making it so that you know how you could go about it. And add a collision shape to it. Box. And just as we did before, we're going to resize it so it's about the size of the card. Right. And of course, we would also add component file card.script to it. You might have different scripts for different cards, or maybe one script to rule them all. That's really up to you. Okay, we're not really going to use that one, but we're setting it up, and because we've already set up a spawner for the player card factory, let's add another factory called the opponent card factory, and we'll have the prototype be the opponent card. And then let's also make our opponent card back, which we will use. And this one, just as we did before, we'll add a sprite. We'll have it derived from the opponent card atlas and specifically use the magenta back. This one here, Hacker Battles. And we'll add the script, the card script, but we're not going to add a collision object, because we don't want to be able to drag these cards when they come into the scene. Like, let's say I'm dealing myself 5 cards and you 5 cards. I should be able to drag my cards, but I shouldn't be able to look at yours or drag yours or whatever. So we're just going to leave that alone. Cool. Now we need a way. So if we go back to our main collection, we see that there's just this one lonely card, and we don't actually need that in the game anymore, because it's we're going to create it at runtime. So let's instead just delete it from this outline, not from the assets here. We don't need it here. And let's start working on our user. The only user interface that we really need is going to be a game object. We're going to call this Gui. And the GUI is going to have two different pieces associated with it. One of them is going to be a GUI object. So new GUI object, which is we're just going to call this text. If you look, so I should caveat this by saying we're benefiting from the button functionality here from Defold-Input, and there's actually a really good button example that uses a sprite for the button and everything. So there aren't buttons built in, similar to the way we're handling cursors. So we have to leverage Defold-Input for it. I'm not going through all those steps. I'm just going to use a little text to serve as our button. So it's not going to be pretty, but it'll get the job done for us. And so this text GUI object going to have a few different things. So under nodes, we're going to add text. And you'll see that there's a problem here is that we don't have a font set up here. So I'm going to right click on fonts and add a font and just use the system font. There, you could import whatever font you like. On the text section, I'm just going to leave it called text. I'm going to position it at 1720 by 560 just because that seems like a good place to put it. And scale's fine, the size is fine. I'm going to change the wording to just draw cards. I'm going to change the font to the system font that we determined we wanted to use. And then kind of leave everything else. You could change the pivot or the X anchor, like whatever. We're just not doing any of that. Okay, save it. So now if I build my scene. Oh, I didn't actually put it in the main collection, so it won't do anything for us. So that's one component that we need here. So if I go back to my main collection, and under the GUI, I add the game object file. Oops, no. Component file, text GUI, which is all good. One thing that I need to do now is to also change, add what's called a Gui script, so that I can determine what that thing should do. So if I do build my game, Control B, I see it, but nothing happens here. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to add a new GUI script. We're going to call this text GUI script. And we're going to delete all this code and copy and paste a bunch of code from elsewhere, which this is, some of this is from the Defold-Input, but I've also added some stuff here. So let's go through it. So I'm importing the button script from the in folder, and the local pressed is equal to false. The local variable called pressed is going to be equal to false. When this game object is instanced into the scene, we want to register text as the functionality of the button. So when text is pressed, we want to print to the screen button. And if it's essentially, if it's not pressed, then what we want to do after the button is while the button is being pressed, we are doing a simple loop that for I equals 1 to 5, that's the range of incrementation. We want to create player cards and opponent backs, and then later just unregister the button and so on. So this is how you use a factory to create different things, and we'll look at what that means. So factory create is just a system Lua function that is called, and we have to enter the URL of the factory that we want to use, which is right now we're player card factory or opponent card back factory. And that takes as arguments or as parameters, it takes the location you want it to be, or the position, a couple of other variables that you just check out the documentation to see what they do, and also the size, the scale of the object that you want to create. And one of these things is the property that we want to, if we want to change any properties. So as we're instancing these cards from the from the factory, the player cards, we want to set their property is draggable to true. We don't want to do that for the opponent backs. And also there's another parameter that can be passed here, and I don't remember what this one does. It might tell us actually if we just say factory might have an autocomplete. Create URL position. Oh, any rotation that we want on that thing. So we don't need to do that. But check out the documentation in any case. There's some useful information in there. Well, a lot of useful information, I should say. Okay, so that's that. And let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. Great. I think that's pretty much everything. One thing that I think we might have to do, and sorry that I'm looking this up on the fly, is that I'm not sure that we have correctly referenced the script that is necessary for, yes, okay. So I'm glad I looked this up on my cheat sheet. So the one last thing we need to do here is we go into our collection. We hit this, where am I? We hit we go to our text GUI. We go to the top level component here, which is a GUI, and we want to add the script here. This text GUI script. So now the text knows that it's supposed to refer to this GUI script. Save it, and let's see if this works as is. I can't remember if. Okay, so it instantiated one card. Let's see if there are any build errors. Component cannot be found. Spawner opponent card back factory. Did we not create one of those? We most certainly did not. You're probably screaming at your screen that I didn't do that. So let's add another factory. Not a label. Add a factory. Call it opponent card back factory. So the URL will change here. Make sure the prototype is set to the opponent card back. Save it. Okay, so now we have 4 opponent card backs that I cannot drag. And probably should change the background color to be a different color so we can see them. Now I have these playable cards, and they're working pretty well. So they move around. The thing is they move under each other. We'll see a solution for that. And then there's also, they're a little blurry, as I mentioned before. So let's address some of these issues in turn. Okay, so one thing that I need to take a look at, and I had to troubleshoot this by looking on the internet and found some helpful solutions in the Defold forums, which are very helpful. And so if you go to game.project and you go to graphics, you'll see this texture profile, which is a default profile. And if we go and take a look at it, there are some different options here. We want to turn MIP maps off, and to do that we need to create a new texture profile because this is read only. So we're going to create a new texture profile in the root directory, and we'll just call it texture profile. And all of this is good. This is all good. Just click on these, leave everything as is, and just unclick MIP maps and save it. And now let's go back to our game project and change to this new texture profile. Save it again, build the game, and that solved our issue here. So if I think that has to do with the scaling. We've been scaling down the cards to like 30% essentially of their size, a third of their size. And for some reason that makes it blurry. So this is a quick and easy fix. Okay, now let's also address the movement of these things underneath one another. So let's look at the Z scaling of this game object. Okay, where am I? Player card. So if I look at the sprite here, I have just the default is to be at 0, 0, 0 position, 0, 0, 0 in terms of the rotation, and the Z component is also 0. So now in my cursor controller script, at the very bottom, I should be able to I've already set this up, in fact, that when the cursor is dragging, the devs have printed this information for us, but then I want to set the Z position to 1 to bring the dragged card to the top. So I'm going to get the position of whatever message I'm receiving it from, whatever game object is sending the game message, and then I'm going to set the position to whatever it already is in terms of X, whatever it already is in terms of the Y coordinate, but then I'm going to send it to 1. Set it to the Z position to 1. So you'll see that when I draw these cards, it is not working, and I have to figure out why that is, because I certainly fixed this before this demo. So we'll take a look at it together and see if we can figure that out. Make sure there's no build errors, or it should be okay here. Okay, let's see. Let's get to that when we get to it. Next, we need to create a little drop zone. So we'll go back into our main collection, and we just need one drop zone, so I'm not going to spawn this thing. And the drop zone is going to just be called drop zone. And it let's add a sprite to it, and I'm totally cheating here, and instead of using my own sprite, I'm just using this blue button sprite that is provided, and stretching it and making it look all weird. That's provided within the Defold-Input as one of the assets for buttons. And so let me create another atlas for any user interface stuff that we might need. Let's call it UI atlas. And we're just going to add one image to it. This, where is it? Blue button. And then let's go to our main collection. Change this to properly say drop zone. And we'll add a sprite to it. Oops, noops, not a game object. We'll add a sprite component. We'll make sure it comes from the UI atlas, and we'll choose the blue button. And let's change some of the properties here of the drop zone. We'll make the position 945 and 547. No rotation, and the scale will be 20 on the X, 5 on the Y. And so we have this kind of like weird looking drop zone, but whatever, it'll do the job. And then let's add a collision object to it because we want the cursor to collide with it. And this collision object is going to be static. We don't want it to move at all. It's just going to sit there. And it's going to be of the group drop zone. And it's going to collide with both the cursor and the cards. Cool. Now, what do we need left? We need a shape. Collision object shape. And I ran into this weird issue where if I made the collision object the size of the drop zone, the cards were colliding with it, or the cursor was colliding with it all over the screen. So I'm not really sure why this is. The workaround that I found to go about this is to change the dimensions to 180 by 40 and 1. So 180, 40, and 1. And somehow that seemed to work. Maybe it won't work on this video, but we'll see. But that should all be set up. And okay, cool. Let's see if we've got everything we need here. Build the game, draw the cards. So let's just see what we're getting messages for. So great, the game engine is appropriately telling us that the cursor is going over and out over the drop zone, and also the location of the cursor. Dragging these cards around, still going under one another, and I'm not sure why. We'll figure that out in a second. So that works. Still can't drop these cards. And then when I drag them over the drop zone, they drop into the drop zone. Okay, why is that? Because in our cursor controller script, we have correctly coded that if the message ID is drag n, then print that message, print the information. And if the message group is cards and the self is over drop zone, which we have determined if the cursor is over the drop zone, then make self over drop zone true. Then drop it in over the location of the drop zone. Now this cards and drop zone starts at 0, and we're incrementally dropping them left to right by also incrementing cards and drop zone. All of this is within the drag end code block. Great, so that's the functionality that we'll want to see. Let's take a look at the issue that we're having with dragging cards and them not being in the right position. So we want to set the position to make the drag card to the top. And this seems to be correctly written in terms of code. It's certainly working in my other, in my cheat sheet or my other version of the game here. So all of that is correct. Let's see where else we may have gone awry here. Let's go to the card script. There's nothing there. It could be in the text Gui script, where we start out with spawning the player cards, and when we spawn them, they go to the X location, which is incremented, the Y location, and we start at a 0. Interesting. So there's something about this that is making things go wacky. And I have a sense that it might be in the main collection, but I could be wrong. So let's see. In the main collection, my cursor starts out at 1 in terms of the Z position. The drop zone also starts out as 1. The GUI is correctly set up. And our spawners are, it doesn't really matter. So we should be in good shape here. And I'm not really sure why. I'm going to build the other game because I have it open here, and we can see if that works any better. Yeah, it brings whatever card to the top. Interesting. So this is well, it was working, but obviously not very well. Let's see how this works in our game. So it does work. I don't know what I'm saying. Okay, so maybe it does work. So it's not perfect, is basically what I'm trying to tell you. So more work needs to be done. I think that there's some tinkering that could be done with that functionality of the game. But essentially you have built this pretty neat little template, very basic, that you're able to draw cards and determine whether they're draggable or not. You have a drop zone that when cards are placed over it, they will incrementally drop them into the drop zone. And this draw cards text isn't very easy on the eyes, but you could put a button here, or you could have it be based on game logic. And we fixed a couple of issues with the for example, the sprites being kind of blurry. We messed around with Defold-Input, both with how to use the cursor, but also the button. And like I said, I cannot recommend highly enough going into the Defold-Input examples and just tinkering around with them, figuring out what makes them tick and how they work. Now, there's a big glaring omission here, and that is that this tutorial presumes, unlike my other tutorials in, say, Unity and Phaser, that you are making a single-player card game here. For multiplayer, similar to other things about Defold, which, like I said, I really like the engine and it's great, doesn't have a multiplayer solution out of the box. So you'll have to go to the asset portal and determine what kind of multiplayer solution you want to use. The two that I looked at most closely are Colisius and Nakama. Nakama requires you to set up like a Docker profile, and Colisius, the client component is similarly, you'll import it into your game and you'll be working in Lua here. But the server part of it is written in Node.js, so you might have to rely heavily on the documentation in setting that up and putting all the pieces together. Nakama, I can't say whether or not it does more hand-holding for you, but there is a tutorial on the Defold website. Here, if you go to Defold and you go to the Learn section and you go to the tutorials, there should be a section here. Oh, it might be in the well, it's somewhere here on the tutorial section. There's a just search for it. Oh, there's the asset folder. I swear I saw it here. Oh, creating online games using Nakama and Defold. So this will take you through a tic-tac-toe game, how to do that. So I don't know. I'm hard-pressed to find the right recommendation for you because I haven't built it myself. I will tell you that in Unity, if you check out my other videos, I've used a third-party package called Mirror, which is a branch off of the deprecated first-party support that Unity used to have for multiplayer. And for Phaser, I've rolled my own using Socket.io and Node.js using Express as the server. Kind of like that solution better. If I were to do this myself, I might go with Colisius, but Nakama seems to be have a lot of different features, and if you need matchmaking and all these different things, I think both will serve you well. But it might just make sense to just do a very bare bones single player like this. Don't get too much in the weeds because you'll want to make sure that if you have a multiplayer game, you obviously want to start with a multiplayer architecture first. Otherwise, you'll be reworking this. This is simple enough that you could probably create a Colisius server and an Nakama server and kind of like tinker with them, see which of them you like better or what suits your needs better. And then instead of having the opponent cards, I'm saying this because this is the way I do it in other game engines. Instead of having the opponent cards just appear on the screen, the way I would handle this is once both clients are connected, one of us hits draw cards and I see these cards on my screen and you see these pink cards on the backs on your screen. That'll let you know that everything's working properly, and vice versa. So then you click and you see blue cards on your screen and I see pink cards on my screen. And then when I drag one of these cards and it drops, it should appear on your screen, and so on and so forth. So you'll actually contain a lot of that game logic server side to determine when people are able to click around in one. I don't know. I haven't, like I said, I haven't done it myself with Defold. I've done it with other game engines, which you're welcome to check out if it might be helpful for you. If there's a lot of interest and you'd like to see something multiplayer wise, please let me know in the comments or join our Discord. And if there's enough desire for a multiplayer tutorial, I can look into putting something like that together. But for now, this has been just a simple introduction to creating a very basic 2D card game template in Defold. And do check out the GitHub repository, which has all the code that you'll need for this project and everything else. And I hope it's been helpful for you. If it has, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more. You can also follow me on Twitter and check out my games and books at nightpathpub.com. And we'll see you soon.